Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask-strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 1023 for September 25th, 2023. Coming up in a few minutes.
When you bring in the first new stillhouse for 150 years at the distillery, the pressure's on, it's got to be right.
In just a few days, it'll be 3 years since Colin Gordon took over as distillery manager at Ardbeg in the middle of the pandemic. We'll catch up with Colin and get an update on everything from Ardbeg's new second stillhouse to the latest release, the 5th edition of Ardbeg's Trevan. I'll also have my tasting notes for it in the What I'm Tasting This Week department. We'll also have Behind the Label and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
How about a really great 12-year-old Scotch whiskey? I have a stellar recommendation coming up for you in just a minute. Spoiler alert, it's Dewar's 12-year-old.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's get started with the news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. The deadline is this Saturday at midnight for the U.S. Congress to pass a spending bill to keep government operations going into the next fiscal year. And without action, federal agencies will start furloughing non-essential workers on Sunday. What does that mean for whiskey? Well, it means the Treasury Department inspectors who sign off on new label approvals at the TTB will not be on the job, and that could delay the release of some new whiskeys until after a resolution is reached. It also means the TTB officials currently working on the agency's definition for American single malt whiskey will not be working. That definition was originally due last April, and there's no telling when it will be completed. Also on the political front, Scotland's government is considering raising the minimum unit price for alcoholic beverages. The proposed 15-cent increase in the price of a unit of alcohol would raise the cost of the average bottle of Scotch whiskey by around £4 a bottle. The current 50 cents minimum price per unit is scheduled to sunset next spring. Scottish ministers are debating whether to set the new minimum at 65 cents per unit. A public consultation period is underway. In other news, Campari CEO Bob Kunce-Concewitz has announced his plans to step aside next spring, and various industry publications are reporting that he's looking for one more takeover target. He's not denying that, as he told me in an exclusive interview this week.
Well, I haven't heard any rumors, no, but we're constantly looking for acquisitions, so that shouldn't be surprising to anybody in the market.
Where are you looking, in the American whiskey space?
We're looking at premium dark spirits, which have an incredible footprint in the U.S. as well as in Asia.
His last big acquisition was the $420 million deal to buy Kentucky's Wilderness Trail Distillery last spring, a deal he calls absolutely strategic for the company.
It brings a marvelous new brand, obviously at a different price tier from most of our offerings. A lot of creativity. It's a very innovative brand and the science behind it. And at the same time, it brings incredible production capacity for some of our flavored expressions.
In fact, Wilderness Trail has been elevated to part of Campari's rare portfolio, alongside other premium spirits like Russell's Reserve. On that note, the second release in Russell's Reserve's single Rickhouse series made its debut this week. Eddie Russell picked barrels from the Camp Nelson F warehouse for this edition.
Camp Nelson F was a warehouse through our single barrel program that we started getting barrels from 3 or 4 different floors, which was unusual, and all of them were just amazing. They had cherry cola to butterscotch to all these different flavors, which is exactly what we're looking for. So doing this single Rickhouse stuff, that's sort of what we look for. It has to be the right age. We're looking for at least 10-year-old up to 15, and F was unusual for us because a lot of times it might take 10 or 12 different groups of samples to pick something out. With F, it was basically one of the first ones we put together. So a little more traditionally what I think of as bourbon from the old times, a little bigger, a little bolder, a little more of that oak, a little more of that smokiness to it. But also those great flavors you got from bourbon, vanillas, caramels, and a little of that honey or molasses, I always called it.
The Russell's Reserve Single Rickhouse Camp Nelson F bourbon will carry a recommended retail price of $300 a bottle. I'll have my tasting notes for it later on. Gordon and MacPhail has released a new 74-year-old single cask from Glenlivet as part of its private collection range. It was laid down on New Year's Day, 1949, and bottled last March. Only 192 bottles are available at a price of £35,000 each. I received a sample and will have my tasting notes for it soon at whiskycast.com. Diageo has released its annual Special Releases collection with 8 single malts in the lineup. The range includes a Mortlach finished in Kanasuki Japanese whiskey casks and ex-Pinot Noir wine casks, along with a 27-year-old Glenkinchie and a 12-year-old Lagavulin finished in Don Julio Añejo tequila casks. For Diageo Master Blender Stuart Morrison, the highlight is the first-ever distillery bottling of Rose Isle single malt.
It may be the cherry on the cake, the reason being it's its first ever launch in the world. The distillery came on stream in spring 2009, and we've been keeping our eye on the quality on the stocks for many, many years. In fact, one of the very first things I did when I joined the business, in order to get my head around things like cask sampling and administration and HMRC and the finer details of what's involved in being a whiskey maker, it was actually to bring in some Rose Isle casks and check the quality. And all these years later, I've found myself in an incredibly privileged position to be responsible for the very first release of this distillery.
The Spirited Exchange series includes bottle and packaging designs by 8 artists from around the world. Bal Blair is adding a 21-year-old single malt to its lineup. It was matured for the first 15 years in ex-bourbon barrels before spending the final 6 years in Oloroso seasoned Spanish oak butts. The whiskey debuts this weekend at the Whisky Show in London and at UK outlets next Monday before a global rollout in the coming months. The Isle of Harris Distillery has released its first-ever single malt. The Hirak is lightly peated and matured in a combination of first-fill ex-bourbon barrels and Oloroso and Pinot sherry butts. It's the first legal whiskey ever distilled on the island and carries a retail price of £64.95 a bottle. Buffalo Trace is expanding to London, not the distillery itself, but Sazerac is opening Buffalo Trace Distillery London in the Covent Garden neighborhood. It'll be a brand home. Think of it as a visitor center without the distillery, offering tastings and other experiences designed to connect visitors with Buffalo Trace and its various brands. It's scheduled to open by the end of the year. Reservations for tours will be accepted soon at the center's website. And finally, a correction. In last week's discussion of the new Kentucky Owl Maester edition, I referred to their former master blender as John Shea. It's actually John Ray, and I'm sorry for the mistake. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's take a look at the calendar of upcoming whiskey events going on around the world. The Whisky Show in London and the Ghent Whisky Festival in Belgium are this Saturday and Sunday. Uncle Nearest Distillery in Shelbyville, Tennessee is hosting its first ever balloon festival on Saturday. Jack Rose Dining Saloon in Washington, D.C. hosts the sold-out Premier Drams on Sunday. Whiskey at the Beach is next Thursday night in Long Branch, New Jersey. Bourbon on the Banks is next weekend in Frankfort, Kentucky, along with the Austria Whiskey Messe in Liebersdorf, Austria, the York Whiskey Festival in England, and Sagamore Spirits Harvest Festival at Sagamore Farm outside of Baltimore. If you're organizing a whiskey event, let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
A thoughtful gift is hard work. What you need is a go-to multi-purpose gift for all occasions. A bottle of Redbreast can say, "Enjoy every minute, they grow up so fast." Oh. And equally nails, "Apologies for the back pain, I should have just hired a moving company."
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by Mortlock and the Classic Malts lineup. 3 years ago, Colin Gordon left Lagavulin to go just down the road and take over for the retiring Mickey Heads at Ardbeg. I talked with Colin on a WhiskyCast live show shortly after his move and caught up with him the other night shortly before an Ardbeg tasting at the Brandy Library. It's been a busy 3 years for you, hasn't it?
It certainly has. We have had a number of projects. When I first started in the distillery, and in fact not long after that we caught up, Mark, we were in the process of commissioning the stillhouse, which I walked into on the 1st of October 2020, half built, people walking about with face masks on, global pandemic, and I thought, how are we going to get this going? But we did it. We commissioned the new stills, and the first spirit ran through the stillhouse in March 21, and we're absolutely delighted with how the spirit is. Great, really good quality, consistency's there, which is clearly king, because when you bring in the first new stillhouse for 150 years at the distillery, the pressure's on, it's got to be right. So absolutely delighted. We commissioned the new filling store as well. So obviously every cask of Ardbeg's filled on site, and we disgorge everything on site as well. So that was a fair bit of work getting that done. And then in January last year, January 22, we brought online another 4 washbacks. So to bring up our fermentation capacity, we moved from 8 washbacks up to 12. So pretty major project, substantial. There's still a bit of work happening here and there with buildings, but around the sort of production and the milling, mashing, fermenting and distilling and warehousing, we are pretty much sorted for projects. So that was a long-winded way of saying yes, indeed, it's been a very busy 3 years.
And of course the visitor side of things too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, when I went in October 2020, when we got round to Ardbeg Day 21, it was all virtual. And then things opened up and people started coming back. And then last year we had an amazing Ardbeg Day, and then really busy summer and lots of visitors from overseas, lots from North America, our usual clientele, and a lot of new faces, which was great to see people from Germany and Sweden and Japan. So yeah, but it's all going, and there's a lot happening with the visitor centre. We've got a really good team there, so they've been busy and trying to offer new experiences, and you know, we're always thinking of ways when people come and make that pilgrimage to Ardbeg, how can you show them something, or just make sure they feel part of something special when they're there. So yeah, they've had a very busy few years as well.
What makes Ardbeg spirits so unique?
I think we've been talking a lot this week. I've been in the States about balance, and I think balance is a very overused word in whiskey. But there is something about Ardbeg, when you look at playing about with peated spirit, some distilleries, very earthy and medicinal characters. I think what Ardbeg has that's quite amazing when you think about how heavily peated the malt is that we use is this balance, is this sooty, smoky, tar, ash mouth coating you get from an Ardbeg. But you have these amazing citrus notes, lemon and lime, and this sort of herbal back note to it. All spirits that people make have complexity, but there is something about Ardbeg new make that I think just gives you something, such a brilliant base to play with when you've got great casks to lay it down in. And so much of that comes from the purifier and the shape, the stills, the way we run the stills, and the purifier that is essentially increasing the height of your still. It's encouraging reflux and making sure these heavy, less volatile fusel oils and things like that drop back in the still. But clearly there's a lot of phenol there, so you're capturing a lot of these peaty heavy notes as well. But it's balanced. It is the most balanced for me of the Islay malts.
The first time we met was when you were still managing the Port Ellen maltings. And now that the maltings is no longer supplying external customers, how are you sourcing your peat and your malt?
Well, we still take a fair bit from Port Ellen. So Port Ellen, as the distilleries have grown and demand has grown, they haven't been able to meet everyone's requirements, but we're still taking a good amount from Port Ellen. But we have been working with external maltsters as well to try and make sure that they can meet our spec, because we ask for a heavily peated malt. I mean, essentially we want 55 parts per million phenol and above from our malt barley. So it was trying to work with customers who would, external maltsters who we'd have long-standing relationships with from Glenmorangie, and Ardbeg has historically taken a little bit here and there from other maltsters. So it was a challenge, but we got through it, and we're working closely with Diageo as well to make sure that the peated malt from Port Ellen we can still take a good amount of a requirement from them.
I know Dr. Bill wants to put a malting floor back in at Ardbeg. Has there been any progress on that?
No, we've not quite. There's been all sorts of discussions over the last number of years about what we can do, and I think nothing's off the table. We're talking constantly, looking at how we can make our lives easier. How Ardbeg never stands still, so nothing's happened yet, but you never know. We'll see what comes.
Let's talk about the new releases now. The Harpy's Tale is almost a softer Ardbeg.
Yeah, so Harpy's Tale is the first of the anthology series where we wanted to use casks that hadn't previously been used for Ardbeg before. So it's a 13-year-old, and it's a marriage of ex-bourbon refills and Sauterne barriques. So the Sauterne barriques have really added sort of soft, delicate, some of the light fruity notes, sort of custard and lemon, and an oiliness as well. So quite different, but a beautiful dram, and that classic Ardbeg new make spirit that we're talking about in this balance. Again, when you look at how that's matured this 13 years, the Sauterne has just brought it into a total different, dimension, a different style of spirit at the end.
And then the new 19-year-old Trayvon, the 5th edition of that one. Gillian MacDonald put this one together, right?
Yeah. Oh, she's incredible, Gillian. So Gillian has been with the business for a good number of years, and she works closely with Bill. So talk to Bill Lumsden, heads up Whisky Creation, head of distilleries, and Gillian works very closely with Bill. This is her pick. So essentially she has looked at the makeup between ex-Oloroso refills and ex-bourbon refills. She's found the sweet spot of how she wanted to set it up, and this is how we've ended up with batch number 5. So I think she's done a fine job from that tasting earlier. It's been a great series, and really interesting to contrast and compare the sort of subtle differences between them, but there's actually quite big differences between them. So yeah, it's a winner again. Brilliant whiskey.
And you did version number 4, so you've had a lot to compare to.
I know, here's me bigging up Gillian. I should be saying batch 4 was better, shouldn't I? No. Yeah, absolutely. I liked a wee bit more of the sherry influence. I thought that would be quite interesting to try when we did number 4. But they're great whiskey. You can't go wrong with laying down great spirit in good casks for a number of years. Ardbeg, I think it's interesting when you give it plenty of years in the wood. We're lucky that we have a whiskey that works so well as a young, vibrant, punchy whiskey. You take something like the wee beastie, citrusy and briny and smoky, and then you add age through maturation. You can soften, but you add complexity. So I think with the 19-year-old, the Trayvons, it's worked really well between the series.
How much influence do you get in the whiskey creation side of things? So do they basically just tell you what to do and then you do it, or do you get some influence?
Oh no, but at the end of the day, in terms of the day-to-day sort of cask filling and wood program, that's absolutely set by Whisky Creation, and they're looking ahead at what we will need. So if we're doing something like a Nugadal or a Corrie Vrecken, they're looking ahead and making sure that we have the right casks and we will fill them. We work very closely together, and everything that we put out has to be bang on the money for quality. So we will not put anything away to the bottling hall till it's signed off by Whisky Creation. They sign off every sample, but we work closely together as well. So we have meetings around innovation and what we can look at doing, and they're amazing to work with. They're Bill and Gillian are just phenomenal at what they do, and I learn a lot from them as well every day. But if we have an idea, they're always keen, and likewise, if there's ideas from their side, we tend to sort of discuss things and try and plan forward how we then run it through the distillery, which is always the intriguing bit.
What have you learned in the last 3 years that you didn't know about distilling before?
Oh, what a great question. I think the commissioning was a really interesting part of what we did. I mean, there's not many distillery managers come into a site as iconic as Ardbeg and you're commissioning a brand new stillhouse. I think I learned a lot about my team and that work with me. It's a bit of an old cliche, but I genuinely have a brilliant team at Ardbeg, and I learned a lot about myself because every day's a school day, we say, right? You're always learning, and I've only been in the industry 10, 11 years, and there's still an awful lot to learn. And I think I learned very much to rely on my people there who have the knowledge of the site, who have years of experience and are willing to share it. They're very, very passionate about Ardbeg. So I think I learned a lot about the site and distilling, but I think the main thing for me was really to utilise my team and make sure that their input was there when we commissioned this new stillhouse.
Thanks to Colin Gordon for spending some time with us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. It's brought to you by Mortlach, whiskey's best-kept secret. Hidden away for decades in some of the world's most famous Scotch whiskies comes a single malt inspired by an original for a fortunate few. Discover the entire Mortlach lineup at malts.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the 5th edition of Ardbeg's Trayvon 19-year-old single malt. As Colin mentioned, it comes from a slightly different mix from previous years of American Oak and Oloroso sherry casks selected this year by Gillian MacDonald, and it's bottled at 46.2% ABV. The nose has notes of honey, toffee, eucalyptus, citrus, and hints of brine and garden herbs. The taste has notes of grilled citrus, pineapple, mango, a hint of black pepper, and a gentle peatiness in the background. The finish is long with peat smoke and ashes, and just a hint of grilled citrus. I'm scoring the 5th edition of Ardbeg's Trayvon Single Malt a 94. Next up, let's look at the new Russell's Reserve Single Rickhouse Camp Nelson F bourbon we heard about during the news. It's bottled at 58.5% ABV. The nose has touches of caramel, toffee, honey, and a hint of cherries. The taste has notes of baking spices, toffee, honey, black cherries, and an excellent balance with a touch of orange peel at the end. The finish is long with lingering spices, honey, black cherries, and orange peel. I'm scoring the Russell's Reserve Single Rickhouse Camp Nelson F Bourbon a 95. Last time around, I mentioned the new Redbreast Tawny Port Cask edition and received a sample of it the other day. It's finished, as you might guess, in tawny port hogsheads and bottled at 46% ABV. The nose has hints of hazelnut, cherries, orange peel, honey, and subtle spices. The taste is thick and oily with notes of baking spices, cherries, orange peel, and a hint of hazelnut. The finish is long with lingering spices and dried fruits. I'm scoring the Redbreast Tawny Port Cask edition a 93. And finally, Jack Daniel's is entering the American single malt category with a permanent release for the travel retail market. It's finished in Oloroso sherry casks for 3 years and differs from last year's initial single malt release in that one was a single barrel bottling, while this will be a blend of different casks. It's bottled at 45% ABV, and the nose has touches of figs, caramel, dark chocolate, a hint of plums, and a nice maltiness, combined with a hint of nutty character. The taste is sweet and fruity with barley sugar, subtle spices, figs, caramel, and chocolate-covered cherries. The finish is long with touches of dried fruits, charred oak, and barley sugar. I'm scoring the Jack Daniel's American Single Malt a 90. I'll be adding these tasting notes to our searchable list of more than 3,500 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
Gabriel here. The new Dewar's 12-year-old has been completely remastered to be richer, smoother, and more balanced. It's a total winner. It's double-aged in first fill premium bourbon casks for greater depth and breadth of flavor, with notes of apples, lemon zest, and spicy and floral notes with a long, smooth vanilla finish. The experts agree too. It's winning awards like pros sink putts. In fact, WhiskyCast's own Mark Gillespie gave it a 94-point rating, which is pretty amazing for a 12-year-old Scotch. It's also earned a 94-point rating from Whiskey Advocate. That makes it their highest-rated 12-year-old Scotch whiskey. It's an excellent testament to the skill, craft, and refinement of the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey, Dewar's. Drink responsibly. Copyright 2023 Dewar's Blended Scotch Whiskey, 40% alcohol by volume.
Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app and see what people are talking about this week. Our community segment is sponsored by Waterford Whiskey. Ian Bruce recently moved from the UK to Australia and has been sharing his discovery of the local whiskey scene in the app, including the Whippersnapper Wheat Belt Series single malt, along with Whippersnapper's rye, quinoa, wheat, and red corn whiskeys. Christopher Glenn found an unusual spelling for whiskey on a bar menu. He writes, "We've all heard the whiskey debate with an E, and now a new challenger arises. They spelled it W-H-I-S-E-K-Y. I'll stick with the two traditional spellings, thank you." Tyrone Cote shared details on his whiskey club's first nosing of the fall, a 25-year-old Tormore from Berry Brothers and Rudd bottled for the Kensington Whiskey Market in Calgary, which he described as a cracker. And Russ Charity is sharing photos from his tall ship vacation to Scotland. They sailed to Jura as part of a week-long trip visiting distilleries, and sailed to Bunnahabhain and spent the night at the distillery's pier. Thanks to everyone who shared something in the app this week. If you'd like to join the conversation, download the free WhiskyCast community app from the Apple or Google App Stores and jump right in. You can also reach us on social media. Look for WhiskyCast on Threads, X, Facebook, and Instagram. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com. And our community segment is presented by Waterford Whiskey, where they explore the frontiers of natural flavor one farm at a time to create unique Irish whiskeys. Visit them on the web at waterfordwhiskey.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. Peter Sprunger sent this question from Austria via the WhiskyCast community app after I put out a call for questions for Eddie Russell the other day. Does everyone in the family have the same palate and similar sensitivity to different congeners? Also pass along my thanks for keeping 101, Rare Breed, and Russell's Reserve brands available and affordable. I hope the goodwill they gain is greater than the profits they would gain from a price hike. Well, I put the question to Eddie, and he says just as different barrels have different taste profiles, so do the three generations of the Russell family.
Jimmy's was completely different from me, where he's strictly that old-fashioned, big-bowed, in-your-face, vanilla caramel, spiciness, but big and bowed, where I was that more creamy, a little more sweetness, not as much of that spiciness was, which you get in all of our bourbons. And then Bruce comes along. One thing, Bruce loved rye, which Jimmy never drank any rye, but he definitely likes that bigger, bolder taste. He likes not quite as old as whiskey as I do, so that's also good for Jimmy. But it works well, even though we're one recipe, one yeast when it goes in the barrel. Being able to pick those different barrels out and blend them together, just sort of make a family type thing. So you get a little bit of everything from us.
Peter, I hope that answers the question, and thanks to Eddie for the answer. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, or you can use the new WhiskyCast community app. Download it today from the Apple or Google App Stores. Our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Find the new Dewar's 12-year-old and discover what all the awards are about. You can toast and thank me later. From Dewar's, the world's most awarded blended Scotch whiskey.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2023, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.